Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to our webinar this evening entitled "A Year-End is a Terrible Thing to Waste." We know that there are a lot of things that we could all be doing before the end of 2020 to help raise some money, to help protect our chapter houses and such. And we also know that probably many of us would like for 2020 to be over by the end of today. Obviously not possible, but we've only got 6 weeks left, 6.5 weeks left to get some tasks done to get us ready for 2021. So I'm Mark Wilkeson with Columns Fundraising, and we are pleased to partner with Alan Lutz and Alpha Fraternity Management with this webinar tonight. And this is one of several that we've done over the last several months. Also with us on the webinar tonight is Scott Sykes, Principal and Partner with Columns Fundraising, and Wes Wicker, Principal and Partner with Columns Fundraising. So let's go through a few housekeeping items. Typical, all of us are getting used to Zoom and WebEx and GoToMeeting and Microsoft Teams. We all have barking dogs. A lot of us have screaming kids. It's not an issue, don't worry about it. I heard that the new terminology the other day about all this virtual call stuff is now Zoomies and Roomies, because we all have people that are lurking in the background. Again, dogs, cats, other pets, kids, spouses, and significant others. So don't worry about it. As Alan mentioned, if you have any questions, please use the chat feature and we will get to all of them through the evening. And we've got a lot of information to share. If we don't get through it all, which we should get through it, we certainly will be providing slides to everyone in attendance, and also we are recording this session. So what we want to start with is the fundraising side. Because obviously, as the title implies, a year-end is a terrible thing to waste. This is the busiest time of year for giving in America. It has traditionally been so. And this year, believe it or not, as it's shaped up with COVID and all the giving from foundations and individuals being directed to COVID areas, and then later in the summer, giving being directed to social justice issues, giving is still on a record pace. In fact, the team at Columns Fundraising is projecting that giving will actually be more this year, will be up this year versus last year. And that's a good thing. And that's in addition to the countless contributions that were given to political campaigns during this calendar year. So we're excited about giving. We're excited about house corporations that have the opportunity to solicit alumni for gifts. Some of our comments tonight will deal with contributions that are tax deductible. And we want to get this information out there because some of you may partner with your national foundation for endowed scholarship funds or educational purposed funds, and we want to make sure that we provide the right information so that people can make tax-wise gifts. You also might have your own local foundation. So whatever the case is, we want to provide that information. So to start, I'd like to turn it over to my business partner, Scott Sykes.
Thanks, Mark. Good evening, everybody. Glad you're in here. As Mark said, we'll talk a little bit about tax deductions here. And of course, tax deductions really aren't the reason people make gifts to nonprofits. The reason they make gifts is someone asked them. And our advice for tonight is divide the top 20 donors or the top 20% or just the top 30 donors. Just take a number of your top donors, give them to your board members or some other key alumni volunteers, call them, thank them, and solicit them for a gift. And of course, call doesn't mean necessarily being in person. It could be just a telephone call, could be the old trusty video call we all do now. And the key thing we wanted to stress tonight is only assign about 3 people as prospects to any one person. Don't overwhelm them with things to do. So give 3 people, let's say, to 10 board members. You can call 30 of your top donors and you're done. We think you ought to check in each Friday with those volunteer solicitors to be sure they've done their assignment. We have one case where we worked with a client where the person who was in charge of doing this just never made any of the calls and never really executed on the plan. And it's a critical time of the year. Mark, next slide. Wanted to mention stock gifts. As Mark was saying earlier, this mentions a little bit about deductibility, but you may be a house corporation as opposed to giving to the parent fraternity corporation. But we wanted to mention stock gifts here tonight because at the end of the year, most big gifts, the sort of $10,000, $25,000 and larger gifts typically come as stock gifts. And nowadays, oftentimes just a $5,000 gift will come in as a stock gift. And we want to be certain that you know right now, certainly before the last week of the year, how to accept stock gifts and know what your DTC number is for stock gifts. And also, as my partner Wes Wicker always says, know what your ACH number is for cash to be wired to you as well. But stock gifts are a really powerful thing, and just be prepared because there's always an alumna or an alumnus who at the very last minute of the year decides they're going to make a really big gift, and you want to be able to take it. Next slide, Nora. Wanted to mention IRA rollovers. The key thing about IRA rollovers is that nowadays it's best to make gifts to charity through your IRA, and then best to leave assets directly to your heirs through the rest of your estate. And you're just avoiding multiple layers of taxation by doing that. So the key thing on this slide is for folks to minimize income taxes, gift taxes, estate taxes. It's best to give through the IRA rollover. So it is still a great technique, even though the recent tax law changes in the last year or two have upped required minimum distribution start date from age 70 and a half to age 72. People can still make this IRA rollover gift beginning at age 70 and a half. And lots of our alumni and alumni are out there in this category. Mark, next slide. A key thing this time of year is you have a lot of people who are like me. I'm what's called an elder orphan. I don't have any children. I don't have any living parents. There are a lot of us out there, and we would love to get a call from you just to see how we're doing and what a lot of us are doing, because we're not with parents or with children at Christmas time or in the holidays in general. We're thinking about what's our legacy going to be, where are we going to leave our money, and who should it be but you? You should be calling them and talking with them about how they're doing just in general, and then maybe sharing with them some of the great things that you're doing. And if it's appropriate, then solicit them. But if you're out of sight, you'll be out of mind. So we're in a contact sport, and we urge you to make those contacts. Now I want to flip it over to my partner, Wes Wicker, and Dr. Wicker is going to talk a little bit about his favorite subject of making yourself easy to give to.
So many of you, whether you're in a capital campaign or annual campaign, on your website, you have a donate now button on your website or a give now button on your website. My first charge to you is make that easy to find. It ought to be on the cover page, not buried in one of the web pages on your website. Have it on multiple pages. So depending on where the alumnus goes, on the website, they can find that donate now or give now button. The other thing I would challenge you, again, regardless of whether you're in a capital campaign or you just have an annual contribution or annual fund campaign, is to make sure you have contact names, addresses, and photographs. So who are the people on your board? You know, the old adage in fundraising is people don't give to buildings, people give to people. And so while we all have fond memories of our own chapter houses, The reality is it's the peer relationships that count and encourage people to give. So what I always encourage our clients to do when we're in a campaign is to put photographs of all the board members up, their names, their class years. Hopefully the board's diverse enough that you're going to see somebody on that page you knew when you're in school. And then two of the most important things is to make sure you've got a telephone number and an email address on every one of those people. Does you no good at all to have their photographs, their names on a web page, and no contact information, because you want to make it as easy as possible for an alumnus who goes to the trouble to go to that website. That's a proactive step. You want to make it as easy as possible for them to find someone they know who can answer their question about what's going on in the chapter. I always like to also have that each alumnus's job title and employer. So the alumnus who's out there and maybe they don't know anybody, maybe nobody is from their era that's on the board. At least I can look at that board and go, oh wow, these are serious professionals. There is a CPA, there is a lawyer, you know, there's a construction guy on the board, there's a tech guy on the board. You know, if I don't know the alumni on your board, what I really want to know is this a professional group of people, or are these just a group of, you know, mid-20 guys who never left the fraternity or maybe never left the college campus? What I want to see there is some diversity. I want to see that these people are professional businessmen or businesswomen, and I want to be able to have the ability to contact them. Okay, next slide. So if you're in a campaign or you're doing an annual mailing, still, in our opinion, the best way to reach out to all of your alumni is through the U.S. mail. There's a lot of online giving today, and that's great. But the reality is most databases we look at of local chapters, they have half or less than half of their alumni base with valid email addresses. So U.S. postal snail mail, if you will, is still the best way to reach out and touch someone. This year, November 26 is only 2 weeks away from us as of tomorrow. So you've got a little bit of time. And if you can't produce a mailing for the entire alumni base, I would suggest targeting a group of alumni that you feel like would be your best supporters, and try to get something out to them by Thanksgiving. Reason being is that many families, as they get together over Thanksgiving, decide where they're going to make their charitable gifts for the balance of the year and perhaps into next year. So families who think about their philanthropy oftentimes meet at Thanksgiving and discuss it over the Thanksgiving dinner table. I would, if I could, send out your mailing prior to Thanksgiving. If not, certainly shortly thereafter. This is, in fact, a case of the early bird getting the worm. Oftentimes, the first charitable organizations that hit the mailbox get contributions. By mid-December, you know, most people's mailboxes are inundated with charitable end of year solicitations, and people just don't pay attention to them. Again, make it easy for the contributor, for your alumni, by enclosing a BRE, a business reply envelope. I often get asked, you know, should we have the envelope stamped? Yes, absolutely. You can buy a permit for postage. So if the alumnus just throws it away, you're not charged the return postage fee. But absolutely make it as easy as possible for the alumnus. Okay. So Giving Tuesday is December 1st this year. I think it's important to have a social media presence, but I also believe printed newsletters are going to get better returns. Giving Tuesday is a relatively new phenomena, and some organizations have been able to raise a lot of money, but it's still a very, very small percent of giving across the United States. And oftentimes when I hear that an organization had this amazing response on Giving Tuesday, I ask them to peel the onion back a little bit, look at those gifts and tell me if those are truly spontaneous gifts that alumni use Giving Tuesday to register their gift, or were they people that had been solicited for a long time and just chose that day and that venue, giving online to give. What we find more times than not, when somebody makes a 5-figure gift on a Giving Tuesday, they had already been solicited. It wasn't anything that happened spontaneously on that particular Tuesday. They had already been solicited, they had been cultivated, and the organization either convinced the person to give on that Tuesday, or the person just decided to do it on that day to boost the numbers for their favorite organization. So while I think this is important, bear in mind, it is a very small percentage of all giving. Okay. And last, email giving. We use Constant Contact and MailChimp to reach out to alumni. I think short, sweet videos are powerful, but remember, these need to be brief. I've often said that sending 2 constant contacts out is better than sending 1 long one. People get e-newsletters every day in their mailbox, and they're not going to spend a lot of time reading a long diatribe about your organization. It's better to hit them with a few quick, brief facts, and then send another one out in a few days, perhaps with a different title and a different subject area, or maybe a week or 2 down the road. But 2 short ones are better, definitely better than long emails. I think videos are good, but let me tell you, 20 seconds on video is a long time. So a 2 to 3 minute video can be a killer. You don't have to spend a lot of time on video to make an impression, but you can make a great impression by just saying thanks. Thanks for your support. On all of these electronic media, have a Give Now link, so you can, alumni who read it can easily punch the button, go through the link, and give via PayPal or whatever source you're using. Again, be very specific in what you're asking for. The word support is a pretty vague word. Use terms like, please consider making a gift of X for our project, whatever that named project is. Okay. So last, give to tax, and I would go back to Giving Tuesday. Give to tax can be effective for small donors, and you see this in a lot of cause-based fundraising. When there's a tornado, there's a hurricane, and most recently, there's a political election, and you read a little text, you agree with it, you hit the link, you go on and give $5, $10. Bear in mind that giving by tax generally attracts very small donors. It is rare to get $100 gift ever giving by tax. So back to Scott's earliest comments, people don't give for tax reasons. People don't give because they want a tax deduction or they want the recognition. They give because someone asked them to give. And still, with all these different tools at our disposal in this era, the best way to ask somebody for money is face to face. So with that, we're going to pivot a little bit and have Alan talk to us a little bit about the things you need to do before the end of the year in terms of chapter house management. So Alan?
Alan, you're muted.
All right, sorry about that. Thank you, Wes, and to our friends at Columns for some great pointers there. I want to touch on the website thing because I am amazed at how many fraternities and fraternity house corporations have websites that haven't been updated in 5 or 10 years. And they are so easy to do now with programs like Wix.com and things that it really makes sense to have a good website, and really can be put together in an afternoon these days. And many of us with COVID have more afternoons free or weekends free than we might have otherwise. So as I focus on things, I'm really going to look at a perspective of what we can do over the next 6 to 8 weeks that will have a great positive impact for our members, for our properties, and for our finances, and touch on some highlights of these. I won't go real in depth on each one, but I would be happy to talk further either after tonight's meeting or call me at our office, and happy to fill you in and give you more information. But you know, let's start with a real focus on our members. And we have to understand that our members are going through a real difficult time. This is a challenge for everyone, but certainly a challenge for young people that want to be out there socializing and working with their friends and those sorts of things. And it's really recreating how these members interact, and much less face-to-face. And obviously now we have the video conferences and so forth. But you know, one of the real challenges we're facing is how do we continue to perpetuate our groups through recruitment when we can't get face-to-face, when it's difficult to have lunch with someone. And so I would really suggest that your advisory group be focusing on doing some recruitment training and some recruitment planning with your undergraduate leaders. Fired Up has some great things on their website about virtual recruitment. It's still the same fundamentals of connecting with people, sharing the benefits, building friends, all of that, but we've got to find different ways to do it. And a portion of that is going to be through technology. What we have seen in the last semester is the groups that did undertake some form of recruitment program and rolled out some things with virtual recruiting. They hit about 85% of their standard recruitment numbers, enough to keep things going. And we have other clients that the chapters really did relatively nothing, and they're going to be in financial trouble in the upcoming years. And I expect we're going to see some chapter houses coming up for sale. And so know that it can be done well, know that it can be done effectively, and go out and try to get some training with your officers and your recruitment chair people to do that program. Another thing, a couple things that really pay huge dividends with chapter culture and seeing that your chapter is on the right trajectory is working through an officer transition workshop where old officers are communicating information to new officers. There's generally, this works best if it's facilitated, and there's a discussion of job duties and responsibilities and getting commitments from the chapter leaders on what they're going to accomplish in a particular semester or term of office. That helps propel a group forward, as does strategic planning, whether that is strategic planning with just the new officer group or with the entire chapter. I like a cycle where the entire chapter does a strategic planning session in the fall, and the new chapter officers do a strategic planning session in the winter term. But if your group has not done a strategic planning session recently, conduct one through Zoom, conduct one with a larger group. It's very beneficial to have the members hearing what each other are thinking and what they want out of their organization. And it's also helpful to have some alumni and advisors involved so they can hear, help steer the conversation when appropriate, direct them away from negative things that they may be interested in, and then memorialize that in a one-sheet action plan that will keep your chapter on the right direction. And then the last thing I would suggest is member education programs. We need to make sure that we still connect with our members, being the alumni and the mentors that are out there. And we need to do it in ways that we may not have tried before. But again, with the video technology, doing some things through Zoom or Google Meet where there's virtual mentoring, job placement assistance, conducting a resume review workshop where the members can scan and upload their resumes to an alumni email address, who then distributes to a group, and then that group might have a panel that spends 20 minutes with each person talking about their resume, interview topics, and what they can do better. Similarly, if you have members that have interests in law or engineering or whatever, just having them connecting them with alumni that can answer questions and provide information and perhaps make the connections that will help that student in their future. I think that can be extremely valuable and pretty easy to put together without a lot of effort. So those are some things I would think the advisory team could be working on at the end of the year. Next slide, please. Finance. We all need to be very cautious with our finances because unfortunately, COVID didn't end when the election got done, or when the election will get done, whatever that might be. So you need to really be focusing on your year-end finances and what you can do to solidify those for the future. So things that should be in process right now are signing spring semester leases. What we're finding is that members want to be out of the dormitories and into the fraternities. So there is greater demand with COVID right now for one semester leases than there has been in previous years. Additionally, many of the members that left campus for study abroad programs or internships are sticking on campus and need housing. So we have some groups that are picking up 8 to 12 leases for one semester, which is a big financial push, a boost for these organizations. So working with your members to find out who might like to move into the chapter house is something that makes a lot of sense. Certainly at this time of year, we should be budgeting, making sure that we know what our finances are going to look like for next fall, and planning our programming for leases and rents. If you haven't already, you should be determining rental rates for next fall to distribute those leases. We see many groups that don't distribute their leases until February, March, or later, and many times that ends in disaster. The earlier you can be distributing leases, the better off you're going to be. As you look at your rental rates, I would say some easy rule of thumb comparisons would be to take a look at the rent to live in a 2-bedroom apartment or the rent per person to live in a large house on campus, and then add about $200 a month to it per person. And that's what your members are going to be paying as they leave the chapter house. And that provides a benchmark of where your rent might be. Similarly, taking a look at the cost of dormitory housing on your campus and looking at the similar room setups that you have, singles and doubles, and benchmarking and being in the neighborhood of 90 to 95% of what the dormitories are charging will get you pretty close to the ballpark. and just taking a half hour to do a little bit of that research rather than relying on your chapter members who are going to tell you no matter what you charge, it's too high, and that they can get an apartment down the road for $500 a month cheaper than what you're charging. You know, having some real data to help set those rental rates will be beneficial. Review and update your chapter house lease. Every state is different with what's going on with COVID and COVID statements that we're seeing in leases. So certainly making sure that your lease is current and protecting you in those situations makes sense. We are also suggesting that you start now and implement a written agreement with your chapter house to agree a minimum rent payment to the house corporation for the next year. And in doing so, what we find is that if the chapter can't support the chapter house by reasonably filling the beds to a certain level of occupancy, there needs to be an understanding and a commitment from the chapter to support the chapter house through charging its out-of-house members and so forth to support that chapter house so that you can make it through a rough time. Certainly completing your 990 returns is an important thing to look at. Your tax returns are due 5.5 months after your fiscal year ends. So if you're on a calendar year, you have until typically May 15th. But many of our groups are on a fiscal year that might be running August 1st through July 31st. In that scenario, we're coming up close to the dates of when those 990 returns are required to be submitted. Our company can help file these returns or seek an outside accountant or enrolled agent to provide these. If your income is $250,000 a year or less, you're able to file a form that's called 990EZ. And that's a very simple form, 2 pages, takes a few hours to put together based on the information, not too difficult. But if your group is taking in more than $250,000, you need to do the full 990 return, which is about 14 pages long, quite a bit more complicated. So again, don't leave that to the last minute. And if you are new in your organization or on your board, I would suggest you go back and ask to see the returns that have been filed for the previous years. We've had several cases where returns have not been filed, or when treasurers have said, oh yeah, my accountant filed it, or my secretary filed it, or something like that, only to find out that they haven't been filed. And if you miss filing your returns for 3 years in a row, you lose your tax deductible status. And that could mean that the income becomes taxable, don't like that, or it could mean that you have to write letters and provide back returns and do some other things and beg for mercy from the IRS. So don't put yourself in that sort of position. Make sure those 990 returns have been filed. Similarly, every year, your organization and your chapter. So let me back up and say 990 returns have to be filed for your chapter as well. So almost no chapter treasurers understand anything about 990 returns. So your advisors or your house corporation people need to be counseling them to see that they get theirs in as well. And similarly, both the chapter and the alumni groups should be having a corporate registration with your state, usually through the Secretary of State's office or a licensing regulation department. You need to make sure that you have a proper registered agent and that each year the form's turned in, and it's usually about $20 or $25 fee to keep your group in good corporate status with the state. Those things can be important, pretty easy to do, and easy to check up on there. Next slide. Alumni leadership. This is an area where we as alumni really need to be looking at protecting our members, organizing ourselves to be efficient, not taking everything as business as usual. And this is a really good time to do that in the next 8 weeks of the year. The first thing I'd recommend is that you really need to look and see how things went this last semester with COVID and your COVID plan at your house. Did you have incidences of COVID? How were they caused? Did your group get into trouble for having social events or exceeding limits that were set by the state or the university? If we had someone that did contract COVID, did we isolate properly? You know, what did we do well and what did we not do well? And how can we improve it? As we see this current surge that we're seeing go through the United States, there's an awful lot of fingers being pointed at congregant living, which means fraternities, sororities, cooperatives, rest homes, you know, those sorts of things where there's a lot of people living in close quarters. And so working so that we can keep our members healthy, I think makes a lot of sense. As we go through this break, whether it be through November, you know, through Thanksgiving and the groups coming back in mid-January to late January on many campuses, certainly we need to make sure that the house is cleaned and sanitized. And this is a good time to do a real deep clean disinfecting after the chapter house has been used. Check with your cleaning people to make sure they're following their protocols. Get an inspection of the chapter house to see how deep that cleaning really needs to be and what should be done. And then take that action so that our members come back to a clean, healthy house. Just as I suggested that the undergraduates do strategic planning, I think it would be a very wise situation for the board to review its strategic plan. And if you know, a good board will do a strategic planning session maybe every 2 to 3 years. If one hasn't been done in a while, you know, just having discussions on a list of topics and determining what should be pursued in each of those topics can be a good productive meeting and get everybody aligned as to what needs to be done. This is also a great time of year to recruit new board members. I commonly hear alumni volunteers lament that they can't find anyone to serve on their committees. And then I ask, well, when's the last time you've looked or asked someone? And I usually get a blank stare back. So what we have found repeatedly is if you go out and ask people to join a board and explain the role and what their time commitment is, you will find people to staff the board and it will make your group stronger. So just like distributing names of donors to call, perhaps you distribute some names of targeted board members to, you know, have each of your current board members call 1 or 2 people and ask them to join the board. And I think you'll see good results. And then lastly, another pitfall I see is where there's 1 or 2 alumni leaders that do all the work and complain about doing all the work, but they often don't delegate tasks to other people on the board. You know, delegate some small manageable tasks to other board members so that they can contribute, share that load, don't overtax them, and that will get them involved and committed to the board, and again, distribute that workload so no one is overburdened with that. Some simple steps that can be done fairly easily. As far as your chapter house goes, here's just a quick kind of checklist of things that you should be looking at this time of year. I touched on cleaning and sanitizing the chapter house. Resupply your personal protection equipment. Make sure the house comes back with a good stock of masks, hand sanitizer, and so forth. And this is a big one that is frequently overlooked or left on the shoulders of the chapter members with often horrible results. You need to have a very specific shutdown and security plan as your members are departing for Thanksgiving. And what's different this year is we may have empty chapter houses for a couple months in some cases. And so you need to have a plan to make sure that that chapter house is properly secured when everybody leaves. And you need to have a plan that chapter house is regularly toured by someone. I mean, if you have to let a grad student live at the chapter house for free for a couple months so that they can walk that house and make sure that the water is still running, no frozen pipes, the heat's on, that's cheap insurance. And so we find that of the major insurance losses that occur to chapter houses, it is very frequently over this winter period when the chapter house is not occupied as heavily, and it frequently results from frozen pipes or from heat outages that then result in frozen pipes. That is a very important thing to do to prevent a large loss. And I go to the conventions and I hear our insurance underwriters and agencies telling us, trying to explain why we continue to see these 10 and 15% increases in insurance costs. And very frequently it's related to large losses from floods that take place over the winter. So, we can all save ourselves a little money and keep those insurance prices from going up if we can reduce these potentials for damages, break-ins over the winter. On many campuses, we know that the vagrants and the criminals, they target fraternities and sororities when they're closed down. So again, it's important for that. If you haven't already, you need to coordinate your winter services, irrigation blowouts, snow services, mats, all of those sorts of things that may be modified. If your house isn't going to be occupied for a while, discontinue the mat service, save that money. From a board standpoint, looking at your capital improvements, begin looking at a plan for 3 to 5 years out, what your chapter house needs, what it might cost, and starting to put those sorts of perspectives and plans in place to work towards those. One of the things that we're seeing is, despite COVID, construction companies and trade contractors continue to have very long backlogs. So if you want work to be starting on May 1st, when the members move out of the chapter house, you need to be signing contracts in January and February to guarantee those start dates. Looking at your preventative maintenance and putting together a month-by-month plan, this is a great time to do that. And related to the shutdown procedures, for somewhere between $5,000 and $8,000, there are flood prevention devices, which are automatic valves that can be installed on your water main, so that if there is a flood, the system will detect it and will shut down your water system to prevent a larger amount of damage. For a $4,000 to $8,000 investment, that is a pretty good way to prevent a major loss. And additionally, depending on who your insurer is, you may receive a discount on your property insurance for having that flood prevention system installed. Next, please. Food service. Again, some things at the end of the year that make sense. We regularly find chapters that manage their own food service, and occasionally alumni that manage their own food service, that fail to communicate to their food service provider that they are going to have more or less members in January for the food service program. If it hasn't been discussed already, if your chapter is shutting down at the end of Thanksgiving and is not going to start up again until January or February, and you have a contract for a set amount with your food service provider, all of that has changed, and there should be some friendly discussions there where everyone can win. If you didn't do it over the summer, this is a great time to service your kitchen equipment. I regularly see groups overlook the maintenance in their kitchens, and that results in appliances that fail sooner than they need to, and it results in potentially unsanitary conditions. So ice makers need to be drained and chemically sanitized. Dishwashers should be maintained and delimed. Your refrigerator and freezer coils should be cleaned. Grease traps cleaned. Deep fryers drained, cleaned, and fresh grease. I've seen some deep fryers in fraternity houses that I think they changed the grease in 1992 or something like that. And it doesn't make the food taste better. I guarantee it. The range hoods need to be cleaned. Your fire suppression systems need to be recertified. These are things that can usually be coordinated with a few phone calls and will reduce your long-term repair costs and again, improve your health conditions. Another thing that we see at break time routinely is that the members will not remove the trash or the perishable foods. And all of a sudden they come back on January 5th and they wonder why there's raccoons in the house and the house stinks, and it becomes a big problem. So someone, hopefully your food service provider is taking care of the kitchens, but you'd be surprised at how much perishable food gets left in refrigerators and freezers. You know, I regularly see $500 to $1,000 of food left in freezers on move out or at Christmas break that, you know, just poor planning resulted that caused extra expense. And I continue to hit on clean and sanitize, but those are big issues there. Next slide, please. So, you know, overall, end of year, we've got this, you know, 6 to 8 weeks where we've got a little bit of quiet time, a little bit of time away from the office. You know, the sorts of things that we're talking about here can really have a major impact to improve your chapter, improve your facility, improve your finances. And, you know, perhaps you can't do all of them. That's okay. Where you have volunteers that you could delegate these things to, try to hit the most important ones, the ones that are going to have the biggest impact. Try to support your members during a difficult time. This is a great time when alumni can step up and build some bonds where you don't have to be in the same room. So I hope that this information will be helpful. On the winter shutdown situation, we have a very good checklist that chapters and alumni can use. We'll distribute that with the recording and the slide set to all of the people that participated in this meeting. And please reach out to us with any other questions you might have. We'll be happy to take questions now if there are any.
Alan, we've got one comment from Shana Smith regarding perishable food. She also was quick to point out that you need to remove food from personal refrigerators in the rooms.
Great suggestion.
Often overlooked, as we all know.
Great suggestion.
Any other questions or thoughts, comments? Let's see. We've got a question or a comment also in regards to electronic newsletters. Wes or Scott, turn this over to you. How effective are they, electronic newsletters, compared to snail mailing newsletters?
Go ahead, Wes. You and I just talked about this afternoon.
Yeah. You know, what we find with most of our groups is that they only have about 40% of email addresses. So even if you're doing a great job with a monthly electronic newsletter, you're still only reaching 40% of your database, whereas oftentimes the national organization and the local chapter have much better physical addresses than email addresses, so you're reaching everyone. I also find that when it comes to local chapter giving and national organization giving, whether it be a fraternity or sorority, you know, your bigger contributions still come by check in the form of a response to a newsletter or mailer, as opposed to those alumni who click a link and go to, you know, your PayPal site. So in terms of return on investment, yeah, it's more expensive to send the newsletter with a return envelope, but your response is going to be much better. We just had one client this summer that we sent a newsletter and inserted in the newsletter was a business return envelope, and they received over $40,000 back just from that one newsletter. Now that's an exception, but I've never produced a U.S. postal printed newsletter that did no worse than earn back the cost, and normally it's about 10 times as productive. Scott?
Just say the same thing that Wes said, that we found that the print newsletters are more effective than the e-newsletters. Not to say don't do the e-newsletter, but the print is more effective for lots of reasons. So keep doing both.
Mm-hmm. And I would add to that, because we all have these glued to our hip every day, as we age, and I'm there, and I need the reading glasses, but seldom use them, it's very difficult for me to read an e-blast on my phone. I like a paper hard copy newsletter now. I never thought I'd say that, but over the last 2 or 3 years, I like getting something in the mail that I can read at my convenience, and is much bigger than one of these cell phones.
Yep.
Folks, I think our time is up. It's been great seeing everybody this evening, and hello again, and thanks to the remaining participants and panelists here.
Absolutely. And remember, year end is a terrible thing to waste. And why do people give? Not for tax reasons, not for recognition reasons. They give because they're asked. So ready, set, go. Start asking.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.